Welcome. I'm Richard Woolley from the University of Worcester, and I'll be leading us through this session on developing the new relationships and sex education curriculum. Our focus is going to be on primary education, and in this session we're going to explore issues relating to policy. Sessions that follow in this series will look at the principles that we believe should underpin the new curriculum and strategies for developing content. In this session we'll explore the new statutory guidance, begin to consider its implications to stimulate further dialogue, consider some of the challenges that we may face, and identify this as a values-based curriculum. The introduction of relationships education as a statutory part of the curriculum in England is a very important development. We're all involved in developing human relationships from our very earliest years and helping children to understand how important those relationships are, that they're fundamental to living a healthy and productive life, learning how to cope with agreeing and disagreeing, appreciating differences, valuing one another and showing respect. These are all absolutely essential ways of being. And what better place than a school environment to explore relationships in a safe and supported environment, working with teachers and other adults that we know well and that we trust. It's been a long journey getting to this point. Over the past 20 years, there have been different times when it looked like this curriculum would be introduced. And yet, because of the timing of general elections and other reasons, it just hasn't happened. And so finally, we got to 2019 when the guidance was approved to be trialled in some schools from September 2019 and to be statutory from September 2020. We believe that relationships education in primary schools should be inclusive. We believe that it should celebrate the diversity of human society. And for that reason, we also believe strongly that it should be relationships and sex education. Primary schools can choose whether to include sex education within their curriculum. But for children to develop a full understanding, and in order for them to have their questions answered in age-appropriate ways at the time when they're ready to ask, having relationships and sex education provides a very valuable opportunity to support our learners. You'll note that the new curriculum is entitled Relationships and Sex Education. And for us, that is a major development. This must be the only part of the curriculum that has lasted a whole 20 years. The guidance document that we've been working on until now was published in 2000 and is entitled Sex and Relationship Education. Firstly, sex comes first in the title, and surely in the real world it's better for the relationship to come first. And in the new title, relationships is in the plural. So we have a curriculum that can explore a breadth of relationships at different levels, as we will see in this session. And also that doesn't infer that we just have one relationship in life. And so relationships and sex education is a much needed and long awaited title. In primary schools, the curriculum is relationships education, and the sex education part is optional for primary schools, but we suggest it is best practice to include it in order to ensure that children have a well-rounded curriculum that helps to explore their questions as they arise and prepares them for the changes that will come as they move through primary school and into secondary school to puberty and adolescence. The aim of the new curriculum is to teach the fundamental building blocks and characteristics of positive relationships. Relationships in a very broad sense, including friendships, relationships with our family members, and with others, peers and adults. Schools must have regard to this guidance. It is statutory, and if they have good reason to deviate from it, they will need to justify that decision. The curriculum needs to be developed to complement the national curriculum and not duplicate its content. For example, aspects of health and human growth covered in PE and science, and elements of online safety covered in computing. And so we need to liaise with colleagues in order to plan the curriculum and also be mindful of children's prior and existing knowledge. Each school has, or certainly will, develop its own policy for this curriculum area. It's a requirement that all schools have a written policy, and they need to consult in the process of developing this, particularly with parents as they develop and review the policy. That doesn't mean that parents and carers can dictate the content of the curriculum, but it does mean that they need to be aware of what the school is going to cover and at what stage in their child's development. The policy needs to define relationships education, and later in this short session we'll give some suggestions for a structure of how that might be achieved. It needs to set out the subject content, outline how it will be taught and by whom, describe how the subject will be monitored and evaluated, and also make very clear to carers and parents that they do not have a right to withdraw their child from relationships education. The possibility of withdrawing a child from sex education still remains, except for elements that are covered under the national curriculum, for example in science education, but relationships education is mandatory in primary schools. And finally, the policy will identify when it will be reviewed. The guidance highlights 5 key areas for the new curriculum: families and people who care for me. And it's interesting that as the guidance was developed, moving through draft form and public consultation, a definition of what is meant by family was included in some detail, and that will be shared on a slide in a few moments. The curriculum will also explore caring friendships, what is meant by respectful relationships, online relationships, and being safe. These areas do not immediately appear contentious, but as we dig into some of the potential curriculum content, particularly if we wish to develop inclusive relationships education. There are areas that will need careful discussion with carers and parents to make clear what it is we're going to cover within the curriculum in order that they understand and don't jump to misinformed conclusions. This is because relationships and sex education must be taught sensitively and inclusively with respect for the backgrounds and beliefs of pupils and parents. I would suggest it should be taught with respect to the backgrounds of all those involved in the school community and beyond, including members of staff. And you'll note here that it isn't only the backgrounds and beliefs of parents and carers that are to be respected, but also of pupils. And so we need to respect their differences and value their questions as they arise, supporting them as they form their own beliefs and opinions. The Department for Education states in the guidance that teaching about families requires sensitive and well-judged teaching. I'm sure that we all aim for our teaching to be sensitive and well-judged across the breadth of curriculum areas, bearing in mind our knowledge of our learners and their circumstances. But here the idea is reinforced because children come from a range of family backgrounds. They may have one or two parents. They may have parents who live separately. They may have siblings, two mums or two dads. They may be adopted and know that. They may be aware of their birth parent. Some children are in public care, or will have a parent who works away from home for extended periods, or who is in prison. Children's families are very diverse, and it is important that we recognise that, both within relationships education, but also in our day-to-day conversations in schools and in the resources that we choose across a range of subjects. We need to make sure that we don't stigmatise children because of their home circumstances. And we also need to consider what is missing from our schools. Because while we sometimes show what we value by what is present in school, sometimes we show our values by what we thoughtfully forget. I still hear teachers who say, when you get home, tell your mum and dad you need your PE kit tomorrow. How many children in those classrooms are having to filter that information because they don't have mum or dad, or mum or dad at home? And so we need to work towards using inclusive language, using inclusive resources, and making sure that children feel valued, whatever their differences may be.